Today on Mean Brews, we're covering Wee Heavy. This episode is in honor of a good friend of mine, Mark Todd, who recently passed away from a heart attack, and this was his favorite style of beer. Let's get into the details. I have 18 winning Wee Heavy recipes. 2 were best of show, 7 gold, 6 silver, 1 bronze, and 2 award-winning. BJCP style is 17C. Description is rich, malty, dextrinous, and usually caramel sweet. These beers can give the impression that it is suggestive of a dessert. Complex and secondary malt and alcohol flavors prevent a one-dimensional quality. Now, from my research, I've seen that the style is pretty stable. There are a couple areas where we've seen some evolution, and I'll touch upon that. And between all the recipes, just some minimal variation between people's recipes where they might have tweaked it a bit here or there. Original gravity, the BJCP range is from 1.070 to 1.130, pretty large. And in general, the recipes pretty much stayed within this range, with the mean being 1.098, just a bit under the midpoint of the BJCP range. For IBUs, pretty big suite here, between 15 to 60 IBUs. The average was 28.5, just a bit high above the middle of the BJCP range. The color was a bit on the low side compared to the mid-range. Average was 21.4 SRM. Malt percentages. Base malt made up about 83% of the grist. About 1% smoked malt was the average for the use there. Crystal 8.8%, toasted malts 5%, roast malts 1.7%, and about 1% of adjunct as well. One area where we're seeing some evolution is the percentage of roast used in the grist. We can see back from the early 2000s, starting at about 1%, trending up to about 2.5%. These are small percentages, but it is noteworthy to see 1.5 times or 2.5 times percentage increase in the amount of roast malts used in today's recipes. And you'll see this reflected at the end in my average recipe. For the base malts, the most prominent was, I grouped these together, Maris Otter, Golden Promise, or Two Row. All the recipes use that, averaged about 75% of the grist. The next most prominent is Munich. 56% of the recipes used a Munich malt, with an average of about 10.7% of the grist. Next was wheat. 17% of the recipes used a wheat malt at an average of 4.9% of the grist. And then there was a Vienna and a mild malt used in one recipe each, with not enough to warrant using them in your recipe. Smoked malt, 38.9% of the recipes used a smoked malt at an average of 2% of the grist. Pretty prominent there. I would think that a smoked malt is something to add a little bit of complexity, but you don't want to overkill it. And definitely do not use peat smoked malt. It is inappropriate in the style. Let's see. Crystal malts, the most prominent is a medium crystal, right around a crystal 60. 55.6% of the recipes used a medium crystal malt at an average rate of 5.1% of the grist. Light crystal was next, with 39% of the recipes using a light crystal at an average rate of 7.2% of the grist. Next up was Carapils, 27.8% of the recipes at an average of 7.6% of the grist. And then grouped together both dark crystal and special B. I think people use this interchangeably. I think only one of the recipes used both. So people selected either like a crystal 120 or a special B malt. 22% of the recipes each. So probably about 40% total used the dark crystal or special B, and the average was 2.5% of the grist there. These curves are very much right on top of each other. Toasted malts, aromatic is the most prominent. 39% of the recipes used aromatic at an average of 5.5% of the grist. Victory or biscuit malt, 22% of the recipes used the Victory or biscuit malt at an average of 5.1% of the grist. Melanoidin, 22% of the recipes used melanoidin at an average of 3.3% of the grist. And then we had some other toasted malts, amber, honey, extra special, roast, etc. There's one more, special roast. Again, one recipe each, used them just to add a little bit of something. Not going to recommend any of these unless you want to add something different to your recipe. Roasted malts, most prominent was roast barley. 67% of the recipes use roast barley at an average rate of 1.3% of grist, so not a lot of roast malts here. Chocolate malt, 44% of the recipes use a chocolate malt at 1.5% of the grist. These averages don't reflect the trend like I showed before. They're trending towards over here in the 2.5% in more recent recipes. Go back. Brown malt was also used in one recipe. My recipe will reflect something in this range of percentage. Adjuncts, only 3 recipes use adjuncts. I don't recommend using an adjunct for this recipe. Bittering hops, EKG was the most prominent used. 39% of the recipes used EKG, 28% Fuggles, 11% Magnum, 11% Northern Brewer, and some others there. Doesn't really matter for this style. Mostly UK-based hops or Magnum Very Clean Bittering hop is most prominent for this style. Flavor hops, EKG as well. Only a third of the recipes used a flavor hop addition, so I'm not gonna. It's right on the border of whether or not I would use it in my recipe. Whitbread, Fuggle, and Northern Brewer were the other hops used for this style. 28% of the recipes used aroma hops. They were either Goldings, EKG, Fuggles, or Northern Brewer were the hops used there. For the mash type, 92%. I think only one recipe of people that reported their mash schedule. Only one recipe did a decoction mash. Most of them were single infusion. I don't think the style benefits from a decoction mash. Mash rest. Alpha rest was at 155 F or 68 C for 60 minutes was the average. And there was a beta rest over here. The single decocted beer did a beta rest here at 146. Another thing we're seeing is that the rest temperature for alpha is declining from 158 back in the early 2000s to somewhere around 150, 152. More traditional. I think the bigger the beer, you don't really need to create that mouthfeel. It's going to do it itself by the gravity that you're making this beer at. So I would tend to follow a more traditional mash schedule, somewhere around 150, 151 for this style. Boil duration, this is where it gets interesting. 101 minutes was the mean. We saw anywhere from 60 to 180 minutes. We'll get into a little bit versus talking about the boil down versus the no boil down. There's a lot of recipes and a lot of data out there that says you should take the first runnings from your mash tun and boil it down and caramelize the syrup and add it back to the kettle to the normal boil. So I investigated this in all the recipes, and only a third of the winning recipes, a little under a third of the winning recipes, use the boil down method. 73% didn't. I also tried to look at, was there, the ones that didn't use the boil down, did they use more crystal malts? Did they use more, special B or any of those caramel malts? And there wasn't really a correlation there that showed that. Boil downs were done with grain bills that used crystal and as much percentage as grain bills that didn't use the boil down. So, I'm not going to recommend a boil down. I know some people swear by it, but obviously it's not something that's really trending to be required to get a medal in a competition. If you enjoy doing it, do it. I've done it before with success, but I think it's another step that just complicates your brew day. Yeah, that's what I said. No correlation to the percentage of crystal malt used in the boil down method. And what we're seeing is also trending that way as well. This is a trend of whether they use boil down or not for each recipe, and that trend line is going down. I did look at the logarithmic scale. I read your comments from a couple of videos ago, and the log scale was also on this line. So just reporting the linear line that it is showing that fewer and fewer people are using the boil down method for this style. The yeast used, this is pretty clear. One recipe each used a different yeast other than the McEwen's, 1728 or 028 from White Labs. 94% of the recipes use this yeast. This is definitely what you should use for this style. Fermentation temperature, the average was 65, around 65, and they've been fermenting anywhere from, this yeast has a wide range of fermentation temperatures, anywhere from 59 to 68. There's been some talk about, in the lower range you can get some smoky flavors. I haven't seen that myself. Would like to hear in the comments if you guys have used this yeast in the low temperature range and noticed some smoky phenolics that have come through. Personally, I haven't seen it. I'm going to recommend right there at 65 for fermentation. It's another area where the temperature is going down over time, just slightly, a couple degrees over the history of the style. Average carbonation volumes was 2.24, pretty common, and mash pH was right around 5.5. All right, my suggested recipe. I'm going to use 77 or 78% Maris Honor. I'm going to have, this is a pretty complex grain bill, but you need it for this style. 7.2% Crystal 60, 6.1% Munich 1 from Weirmann, 5.1% aromatic malt. I'm going to use 1.7% Crystal 120, 0.9% roasted barley, 0.7% smoked malt, just a touch of smoked malt just to give it a little complexity that doesn't stand out. I would defer to a cherry smoked or a beechwood smoked malt. Do not use a peat smoked malt. It will contribute flavors you do not want in this style and that are inappropriate. And lastly, 0.7% chocolate malt. I'm going to bitter with Goldings, 22.1 IBUs. There I said cherry and beech. That's on the wrong line. Sorry for the flavor addition hops. I know it was borderline, but I am going to put it in there. About 0.2 ounces per gallon or 1.5 grams per liter of East Kent Goldings added at 15 minutes. The reason why I put it in there is there was enough, combined with the aroma and the flavor hops, there was enough to warrant a late addition hop. It'll probably go away with time, but I would add a EKG hop there at the tail end. I'm going to shoot for the average 1.098 original gravity and 28 IBUs. I'm going to use the black or brown full water profile, and just to get that maltiness out of the style, I'll probably would look at increasing the chlorides up to about 100 parts per million. Keep the gypsum restrained, the sulfate restrained, and focus on the malt characteristics for this style. Fusion mash at 60 minutes at 155 Fahrenheit. I'm going to sparge to 1.010 runoff and boil the wort for 120 minutes. Usually with these big beers, you're going to pull a lot of volume out of your mash tun, and it's just going to require a long boil to get to your original gravity. So I usually try to extract, my efficiency is really low, and I think a lot of people's are with these big beers. Extract as much as you can until you get to 1.010. Usually the volume will be pretty high. Boil it down to get your original gravity. I'm going to chill to 63, oxygenate, and pitch a big pitch of White Labs 028. And I'm going to reoxygenate again 24 hours after fermentation kicks off. You want this to attenuate as much as it can. Ferment at 63 and then raise it up to 70 as the fermentation slows to help clean up any of its residual byproducts. And then keep it on the yeast. You want to keep it on the yeast and let it clean itself up. 2 to 3 weeks. You're not going to get autolysis in 2 to 3 weeks. Keep it on the yeast. It won't show any activity, but it's working. Then I'll cold crash and keg or bottle, 2.3 volumes. All right, that's it. I put a link in the description of the video for GoFundMe for Mark's family. He leaves behind a wife and 3 young boys. If you feel moved to contribute, please take a look at that link and give what you can. Next week, I'm going to put another vote in the end of in the comments of this video. So whoever wins the most thumbs up on the next style, that's the style I'll do next. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you liked it, please subscribe. Oh, we also have started the meanbrews.com webpage. I have all the presentations there for all the beers that I've done, and I will continue to do so. If you get a chance, go check it out, download a presentation, and it's another resource to give you to help you formulate your recipes. I'll see you in a couple weeks, and we'll see what the next style is. Bye-bye. This episode is brought to you by the Master Homebrewer Program. Earn awards and badges based upon how you score in homebrewing competitions across the world. Sign up now at cialers.org.